Good morning, Morai V'Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Makkot, and we are on top of the Gimel Amud Aleph. Today's Amud is being learned. Lischut Refuah Shelema Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. That's a full recovery for the Refuah Shelema of Yael Bat Loren Esther Shoshana, and of course also for the Schut of Arvin Netanel ben Sonia, that should be saved from the difficult decree that has been hovering over his head. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should all hear Besurot Tovot like yesterday. Amen. Amen. It's pretty amazing stuff. So it says the Gemara, on top of the Amud, I'm just going to go over a few lines that we did in the Gemara. We're discussing Edim Zomemim, of course, of the fact that they are meshalem lefi chelkam. That means the Gemara says et zomem meshalem lefi chelko. One et zomem pays based on what his portion of the payment would be. So if I would say that to you as a blanket statement, how would you understand it? You'd say, oh well, it means if you have two edim zomemim, it will be 50-50. That's how we would understand it. The Gemara also says, well, if you say that, it can't be, because that already we learned. The Gemara cannot be telling me something that's in a Mishnah or in a Braita stated clearly. That can't be. We know what we know. It's a chidush. So let's learn it together. Second line from the top. Amar Rav Yehuda. Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of his Rebbe, Rav. We all, of course, know Rav Yehuda was one of the sharpest of the Amoraim. He was a primary student of Rav first. Rav was much older than Shmuel. Actually, we got a little bit of history. The Seder Adorot writes that Rav, who, by the way, his name was not Rav, that was his title, just like Rebbe. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he was the rabbi, Rebbe, right? Because he was the most famous Rav of his time, but it was in Eretz Yisrael. The Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael were called Rebbe, the Rabbanim in Bavel were called Rav. That's how they differentiated between Eretz Yisrael Rabbanim and the ones in Bavel. So Rav was the equivalent of Rebbe in Bavel. He was the rabbi, right? His name was Abba. His nickname was Abba Arichta because he was extremely tall and he was extremely handsome. The Gemara says about Metziada Pedalet that he was one of the most handsome people of all time. And the Gemara also says Rabbi Mishpachat Briema, he was a very healthy person and lived an exceedingly long and healthy life. According to Seder Adorot, he was the famous Rab Abba, the scribe and the student, the top close confidant and student of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That makes him very, very, very old. But nevertheless, he was first the student of Rav Yehuda, and then when Rav Yehuda passed away, when Rav rather passed away, he became the student of Shmuel. So you find a lot of times in Shas, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and many times Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, because he learned by both of them. And we also mentioned before that whenever the Gemara says Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, means they directly heard it from them. But when he says Amar Rav Ploni Mishum, that means they heard it in their name, but not a direct Talmud Rebbe relationship. This is like basic things in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Et zomeh meshalem lefi chelko. Et zomem pays his portion. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? My meshalem lefi chelko. What do you mean he pays his percentage, his chelek, his portion? Ilema. If you want to tell me the 50% that we just mentioned before, which is their chelek of payment. So says the Gemara, Tanina, we learned that in the Mishnah. Chazak u'baruch. We're going to have this in Daf Hey, Amud Aleph coming up, that Meshaleshin b'mamon and Meshaleshin b'malkut. It's not even in a different Masechet. It's the next Mishnah. Mamash, we're going to have it upcoming. That you divide the payment of money, but you don't divide the payment of the lashes. In other words, when they have to pay, if there are 3 edim and they have to pay $90,000, each one of them, when they become zomemim, each one of them pays $30,000. But if they become chayav malkut, each one of them takes a full 39 malkut. We don't say everyone should take just the 13 lashes. So that's a Mishnah. So that we know that you pay 50%. That cannot be the chidush of, you don't need Rav Yehuda Amar Rav to tell me that din. So what is Taka the Pshat? Ela, kegon de itzum chad minayhu. The Mishalem pal gadide. Mara says the case is, one of the Edim became Ed Zomem. In other words, Reuben and Shimon came and they testified. And then Levi and Yehuda, they come and say, well, you guys cannot be a legitimate group of Edim. I don't know about Shimon, but Reuben, you were with us in France. Right? So we don't know about Shimon. Shimon did not become an Ed Zomem. Reuben became an Ed Zomem. What's the case there? The Gemara says then he pays 50% of what they were trying to afflict the subject of their edut with. The Gemara says, wait a second. Don't register that in your minds because that's incorrect. That's simply not true. Umi meshalem. A person that becomes a single Ed Zomem, singled out from the group of his edut. If you have a group of edim that one of them becomes the Ed Zomem, he pays? The halakha is that he doesn't pay. Tanya, we learned in the Braita in Masechet Chagigat Zayin, says the Gemara there, En Ed Zomem meshalem mamon ad she'azimu shenehem. Ed Zomem does not pay one single penny until the entire group of Edim becomes Zomem. That's the halacha. So says the Gemara, so that cannot be the case either. So what is, we are still like with this question mark, like, what's the case that the Ed Zomem pays lefi chelko, based on his portion? Amar Rava be'omer edut sheker he'adati. Rava says it's a case that the two Edim testified that Reuben owes Shimon $100,000, and then one of the Edim felt bad. They did not become Zomem. There's no second group of Edim. Just one of the Edim that lied, they themselves felt bad. They come back to Bedin and say, you know what, I lied. The Edut that I was really not here, I was in France, I couldn't have even been there. He was Mezim himself. He's like, I can't, it was lying. So says the Gemara, in that case, Kol Kamineh, do you even have the allowance halachically to make yourself an Ed Zomem? Now, why not? By the way, what do people think? Can you do that or not? The Gemara says you can't do it. Why not? Because there's a halacha in Hilchot Edut, and these are important principle halachot in Hilchot Edut. Kevan sheigid, says the Gemara, shuv eno chozeru magid. Once you go to Bedin and you testify, official testimony, you cannot go back on that testimony and say, oh, I was lying, I was joking. You cannot do that. Once you give an official testimony in the Bedin, we take that seriously enough that you cannot go back on it. It's, oh, I was just joking, I had a bad day, I hated him, I lied. You cannot do that. So, once you can't go back and say that, you also cannot say that I was lying and I was a Rasha, now I'm becoming Ed Zomem, I have to pay. You cannot do that. Fine? So says the Gemara, so that can't also be that one of them pays 50% because he admitted that he was lying. You can't do that either. So we're stuck now. Well, what's the case? Says the Gemara, Ela b'omer he'adnu ve'uzamnu bebetin peloni. So the Gemara says, the case is, the guy comes to a bedin, a different bedin. He comes to Los Angeles, and he says, this guy that lives in Los Angeles, we in New York, we went and we testified against him, and we were proven wrong. A second group of Edim came, and disproved us. We became Edim Zomemim, and then we ran away. So here I am. I'm doing tshuva, as I said, tshuva. I want to pay 50%. That's the case, right? Because already, it's not that I'm making myself Ed Zomem, but rather I'm saying that I became Ed Zomem officially in the New York Bedin, in a different Bedin. That's the case. Mara says, okay, fine. I have no problem with that. I only have one issue with that. Because you remember the last thing we learned, last shiur was the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. You remember? Rabbi Akiva was the /5th case. fourth case really, it was the Braita, 2 in the Mishnah, 2 in the Braita, and the fifth case was Rabbi Akiva. He added she'eno meshalem al pi atzmo, that the person, if they become et zomem, and before they stand trial, they run to a different bedin and they say we became et zomem, they don't pay a penny. So this will become not like who? Rabbi Akiva. That's exactly the point of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said if they become zomem, the second group come and testify, and this group, the first group of them, run to a different bedin and they admit. They say, we lied, we testified falsely against this guy, and we became zomim. A second group of edim came, disproved us, we became edim zomim. Here we are admitting it. Rabbi Akiva said this group of edim, even though that they became zomim, they pay 0, not a penny. And now we're saying that they're paying 50%. So the Gemara asks this question. The Gemara says, wait a second. Keman, the local Rabbi Akiva, you want to establish this only according to Tarakama, not according to Rabbi Akiva? The Gemara says, no, not necessarily. That's just a technical problem. The technical problem I could take care of. Because what can be the case? What can be the case? Says the Gemara, Ha'amar, אף אינו משלם על פי עצמו, אלא באומר, העדנו והוזמנו בבית פלוני וחויבנו ממון. You remember how we said this, right? We said that if let me say this again for those who may not have been here last time. If a group of edim testified and then they became zomem. So in other words, let's imagine Reuben and Shimon testified that this guy owes $100,000. Levi and Yehuda come and say, well, a second, you guys could not have seen that, because on the day that you claim that he borrowed the money, you were in France with us. You were not even in Los Angeles. So you could not have seen it. So that becomes Zomim. What happened at this second, when the second group comes? This second, what happened was only one thing. The guy no longer owes $100,000. That's what happened. Now, what's the next step? Next step is now the Bedin is going to have a new session scheduled to judge a verdict on Reuben and Shimon, the first group. It's going to be a separate, it's not automatic. They have to now be a standing trial and have a verdict of their own that now they owe, the Bedin is going to paskin, that you tried to make him pay $100,000, you guys are going to pay $100,000, $50,000 each, right? That's what's going to happen. So if they run away before they stand trial, that's the case of Rabbi Akiva. But what if they actually stayed there, the Bedin said, oh, we have an extra half hour over here, let's have the trial right now, right? And they actually had the session of Bedin, and they paskin with the thingy, they say, you owe money. Done. Right? And then they run away before the police catches them. Before the Bedin police catches them, run to Hollywood, right? Where else? Right? So then they want to do tshuva. Now in this case, they're for sure chayav. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, they're chayav. So Gemara says that's the case. The case is they lied, they were found guilty, they had a verdict, a guilty verdict, and then they ran away. And now one of them is doing tshuva. One of them comes to Bedin and says, Hatati, Aviti, Pashati. This is the story. We testified falsely. We were proven guilty. We stood trial. We were pasking the verdict of Chayav. We ran away. I'm coming to pay. And that, the Gemara says, Et Zomem, if one of them comes, Meshalem lefi chelko. Even though, what's the chidush? Sal kadata chamina. Look at the last line before the Mishnah. Sal kadata chamina, I would have thought, in other words, why do you have to say this? Isn't this pashut? Says the Gemara, no. Sal kadata chamina, kevan del chavre lo matzi mechayev. He can't, his edut right now, cannot obligate his friend who testified with him, even if he's with him here in the town, and he says, what are you saying? He cannot obligate his friend, but if his story lines up with halacha, which is, he says, we became zomem, we had a verdict of chayav, and here I am to pay, even though that he can't with his edut, with his confession, he cannot make his friend pay the rest of the money, but he himself, we would have thought maybe he can't make himself chayav either, because we learned this before, that edim zomimim is a pact, right? If one of them doesn't work, the other one doesn't work either. We saw this number of times already. But this, says the Gemara, he could do. He could come, confess, say, we became edim zomimim, we stood trial, we had a guilty verdict, and I am admitting, and here is the 50% of the money that we tried to afflict this guy, this poor guy, with our false testimony. And the Gemara says, yes, that's exactly correct. He could make himself chayav, and if he afterwards says, no, I was just joking, then it doesn't work. He is mechayev himself, and he pays 50%. Fine. Next Mishnah says, the Heilige Mishnah, says the Mishnah, Meidin anu et ish peloni shgireshet ishto. Now you're going to go a journey through Shas. Every Mishnah is like a few lines over here, and each one of them is a different sugya. So what if a person says, the group of Edim come and say, well, Reuben divorced his wife, and he has not paid Ketuvah. Now, a preface to this, when do you pay Ketuvah? A man is asur to live with his wife without Ketuvah. Even if for one day you lose your Ketuvah, you misplace your Ketuvah, you should right away ask a she'elah, because the halakha in Shulchan Aruch in Hilchot Ketuvah is, even one day is asur to live with your wife. The reason that I'm not saying it's asur and go take a hotel is because there are certain leniencies in certain specific cases, but the general halakha in Shulchan Aruch is that if you don't know where your Ketuvah is, even for one day, you're asur to live together, like a nida, mamash, asur, until you have a new Ketuvah, or either you find it or you write a new Ketuvah called Ketuvah the Irkesa, a Ketuvah that was lost. You have a replacement. By the way, in Gush Katif, when they were, it's very much appropriate to talk about it right now, because finally it's getting back. But when they were kicked out, you remember those videos and those pictures, a lot of people, the way, rushed out of their houses, pulled out of their houses, plucked out of their places, a lot of people lost their Ketuvah. And that night, basically, there were hundreds and hundreds of cases of Ketuvah de Irkesa because of this. Again, this is a serious question. But when do you pay Ketuvah? This, by the way, this is the original prenuptial agreement, right? This was Chazal thinking thousands of years ahead of the society to secure the rights of the woman with Ketuvah, right? So, what does the Ketuvah mean? Ketuvah means that you're committing yourself to give security to the wife. Part of the Ketuvah is like really 14 obligations of the husband to the wife. Not all of them are mentioned in the Ketuvah, but the general gist of it is that you are providing security, both in lifetime and also after death. So it has a clause of how much the amount of Ketuvah is. 200 zuz is the baseline, then you could add to it Tosefet Ketuvah, right? And that she gets paid when? She gets paid if she is alive when the marriage is terminated. That's the way it is. So there's just two cases. Either she gets divorced, then she collects the Ketuvah, or if the husband passes away when she is still alive, then she also collects Ketuvah from the estate of the husband. Right? So that's the Ketuvah. Now, what if a person divorces his wife and hasn't paid Ketuvah? So then she is entitled to Ketuvah. She's entitled to Ketuvah. What if she can't prove it? So Edim always helps. So therefore, two Edim that come, Meidin anu, and they say, well, Reuben divorced his wife and has not paid Ketuvah. Velo natan la Ketuvata. So then two Edim come and say, wait a second. You're saying that this happened in past 10 days. Past 10 days until last night, we were in the same flight from France back. You were all with us. You cannot have witnessed that. Maybe you paid. You were not there. You were with us. So that's Edim Zomimim, right? They tried to make Reuben pay, let's say 200 zuz to the wife, and they became now Edim Zomimim. Do we say that they have to pay 200 zuz to Reuben? What? Anyone that says no? Why should this be different? Any time that you try to make someone pay, you pay. Why should this be different? It shouldn't, right? Shouldn't be different. The only difference is Ketuvah is not 100% obligation, as we mentioned before, because there's a chance that she would die first, and he would never end up paying. But there's also a chance, right, that he would divorce her, right? Certainly, if you're in Los Angeles, you go to a wedding in California, al pi rov, you have to say, Baruch ta'ena emet, I'm sorry for you, like, there's a 70% chance of divorce. But, back then it wasn't that high, but still there's a chance of divorce. There's a chance of him dying. So if he dies first, or if he divorces her, he's going to lose this 200 Jews anyway. So I'm not trying to make you lose money. You're going to lose it anyways. I'm just taking it now. So do you see the difference? Whereas in other cases, I am trying to be mechayev you to pay, and money that you would not have paid otherwise. Here, who says you're not going to pay? Statistically speaking, probably most of the chances are that either you're going to divorce her, or you're going to die before, and she's going to collect it from your estate anyways. So therefore, maybe it should be different. So says the Gemara, "V'halo ben hayom uben lemachar sofo liten la." It's whether today or tomorrow, at some point in history, in the future, he is going to have to pay the Ketuvah. So says the Gemara, what would you do, by the way? What would you do? Me and you would say, well, get an actuary, get some statistic numbers, right? And see what are the chances that women in marriages kill their husbands, or the husband kills the wife, who dies first, and the divorce rate, and put all those statistics together and get a number. And get a number and say, well, not every Ketuvah, by the way, is just 200 Jews. 200 Jews by itself, times Kukim Kesef, Saruf, is very big machloket how much it is, which is very interesting. When I was doing the Sugya Ketuvah in the first time, many years ago, silver actually was very up back then, and because it's the price of silver. And back then it was maximum $60,000. It wasn't like a tremendous amount. But you could have Tosefet Ketuvah. This could make a massive, for instance, the Gemara in Ketuvot, Daf Samech Vav. The Gemara there says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader of the Jewish nation, and duration of the time of the Churban, right? The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed in his time. As we learned in Masechet Gitin, Daf Nun Vav, Nun Zayin, right? This is a Tisha B'Av Gemara that everyone has been familiar with. But the Gemara in Ketuvot, Samech Vav says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was walking, this is right after Churban, outside Yerushalayim, and he sees a young woman that was poor. She was doing something very disgusting, actually, to try to just eat something and not die. And says, who are you? And says, I'm the daughter of Nakdimon ben Gurion. Now, Nakdimon ben Gurion was one of the 3 richest billionaires of the time before the Churban happened. Rabbi Yochanan was shocked. He says to his Talmidim, I remember I was an Ed on her Ketuvah, and I was reading the Ketuvah, Kriyat Ketuvah they gave to me, and I was reading millions, elef alfei dinarei zahav, millions of golden coins was her Ketuvah. Millions of coins, right? So you could have that type of Ketuvah. Oh, this makes a massive difference. Listen to what the Gemara says. We assess how much a person would want to give to her Ketuvah of this woman, she'im nit almena or nit karasha, ve'im meta yirshana bala. How much would you pay to take chances to buy out this Ketuvah? That would be the market value of the Ketuvah, right? A Ketuvah like that, like millions of dollars of Ketuvah, I would say, well, I would pay $500,000 to take the chances of losing my $500,000 or getting $10 million in 10 years. It's a good investment, right? Or maybe not $500,000, maybe $100,000, but that would be the market value. So says the Gemara, Ketzat Shamin, how do you assess it? In other words, the obvious question is, according to who? Who are you buying it from? Are you going to the husband and saying, well, I will buy the Ketuvah of your wife that if you die first, I will pay the money, but if she dies first, I'll get the money instead, right? So you gambling, basically. Right? Are you going to the husband to buy the market value for the husband, or are you going to the wife and say, well, you know what, this is a piece of paper sitting here in your drawer. is worth nothing for you until he dies or you get divorced. Guess what? I'm going to pay you cash right now, $500,000. I take the chances that if you die first, I lose my money. But if he dies first, I get the money, but you get your cash right now. Who are you going to? So says the Gemara, Ketzat Shamin. Amar Rav Chisda beBaal. Rav Chisda said, we go to the husband, based on the husband's value, we assess it. And says the Gemara, Rav Natan bar Oshaya, Omer be'isha. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, be'isha. He paskin that we go based on the value for the woman, ubiktuvata. He adds this word of ubiktuvata. That means there are all kinds of chiyuvim that the husband has to the wife. It's not just ktuva. But we don't care about those ones. We only, even though that edim zomemim, we're trying to make the husband pay all of those as well, we don't go with those extras. We go only with the amount of the ketuvah, because that is something clear, that is something solid that he has, and therefore we go based on that. We're up to the next Mishnah, B'ezras Hashem, starting it tomorrow morning. This is like life insurance. Exactly. You see.